The security scanner hummed with its usual mechanical precision as Marcus Chen stepped through the checkpoint at Titan Station's main docking bay. The blue light washed over his frame, cataloging every detail of his body for the station's database. He stood perfectly still, arms slightly raised, breathing steady. Just another routine scan at just another space station, but the scanner lingered longer than usual. Security Officer Kethara's four eyes widened as her screen populated with data. The Zilithian had seen thousands of beings pass through this checkpoint, but never had she witnessed a readout quite like this. Her mandibles clicked nervously as she read the biometric analysis scrolling across her display. "Sir, could you please step to the side?" Her translator rendered her chittering speech into standard galactic. "There seems to be an irregularity with your scan." Marcus sighed but complied, moving to the designated waiting area. He'd been through this before. The scars always triggered additional screening. 23 years had passed since Kepler 442b, but the marks remained as vivid as the day he'd received them. Kethara's supervisor, a bulky Krosnian named Vex, lumbered over to examine the readout. His rocky exterior showed no emotion, but his voice carried unmistakable concern. "These scarification patterns, the database is flagging them as blast burns from plasma weaponry, multiple impacts across the torso and arms." "That's not all," Kethara whispered, pointing to another section of the display. "Look at the bone density readings. His skeletal structure shows signs of calcium depletion, consistent with prolonged exposure to high-gravity environments. And these muscle fiber readings?" Vex leaned closer, his stony features creasing into a frown. "Impossible. No being could survive the kind of trauma indicated by these scans." The database search completed with a soft chime. Both officers fell silent as the classification appeared on their screens in bold red lettering, "Planet Killer Survivor." "By the 7 moons," Kethara breathed. "He's one of them." Marcus noticed the change in their demeanor immediately. The way they looked at him shifted from professional suspicion to something approaching awe mixed with terror. He'd seen that look countless times across the galaxy. Some beings regarded planet killer survivors as heroes. Others saw them as dangerous relics of humanity's darkest capabilities. "Is there a problem, officers?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and level. Years of dealing with these situations had taught him that remaining composed was essential. Any sign of agitation would only escalate things. Vex approached slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over Marcus. "The database indicates you were present during a planet killer event. Is this accurate?" "Yes." Marcus saw no point in denying what the scans clearly revealed. Kepler 442b 23 years ago. A small crowd of other travelers had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual delay at the security checkpoint. Marcus could hear their whispered conversations in a dozen different languages, though the same words seemed to repeat across all of them. "Human, planet killer survivor." Kethara consulted her screen again, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Sir, protocol requires that we notify Station Command when individuals with your classification pass through our facility. You're not under arrest, but we'll need to escort you to a holding area while they decide how to proceed." "I understand." Marcus had been through this process on 17 different stations and planets. Sometimes it took hours, sometimes days. The galaxy still didn't know quite what to do with the survivors of humanity's ultimate weapons. As they walked through the station's corridors, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the polished metal walls. At 55, he looked older than his years, though his body remained surprisingly strong. The gravity training from his military days had left him more resilient than most humans, but the psychological weight was harder to bear. Other beings pressed themselves against the walls as their small procession passed. Word traveled fast on space stations, and by now half the residents probably knew that a planet killer survivor was aboard. Marcus kept his eyes forward, focusing on the soft thud of Vex's heavy footsteps beside him. The holding area turned out to be a comfortable suite rather than a cell, complete with a viewing port overlooking Titan's methane lakes. Marcus settled into a chair and waited. He'd learned patience during his years drifting through space, taking odd jobs and trying to outrun a reputation that followed him wherever he went. Within an hour, Station Commander Yilseth arrived. The elderly Altarian Silverskin showed the deep lines of age and responsibility. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had seen enough of the galaxy to understand its complexities. "Mr. Chen?" she said, settling into the chair across from him. I've reviewed your file. Sergeant Marcus Chen, 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment, decorated veteran of the Proxima campaign. Survivor of the Kepler 442b incident. That's correct. Marcus met her gaze steadily. The Altarian's large dark eyes showed neither fear nor judgment, which was refreshing. You were there when humanity deployed its first planet-killer weapon. I was there when we had no choice but to use it. The words came out sharper than Marcus intended. Even after all these years, the memory of that day could still trigger his defensive instincts. Yilseth nodded slowly. The Catherian hive fleets had overwhelmed every other world in the system. Kepler 442b was humanity's last stand in that sector. 12 billion humans called that planet home, Marcus said quietly, along with 3 billion other sentient beings from a dozen different species. The Catherians didn't care about species or allegiances. They just consumed everything in their path. And you were part of the evacuation effort. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering. We saved maybe 2% of the population. That's what the planet killer was supposed to prevent. Total annihilation. Instead, we became the ones who destroyed our own world. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history. Finally, Yilseth spoke again. The galaxy remembers that day differently now. 23 years of perspective has changed how we view humanity's choice. Has it? Marcus opened his eyes. Because from where I sit, beings still look at me like I'm either a monster or a ghost. Perhaps, Yilseth said carefully. It's time the galaxy heard your story properly. Commander Yilseth leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with the careful attention of someone who understood that history was rarely as simple as the records suggested. The methane storm swirling across Titan's surface outside the viewport seemed to mirror the turbulence of memory that Marcus carried with him. Tell me about the evacuation, she said gently. The official reports are sparse. Marcus rubbed the largest scar on his chest unconsciously, a habit he'd developed over the years when discussing Kepler 442b. The Catherians hit us fast. 3 hive ships, each the size of a small moon. We had maybe 6 hours warning before they reached the outer system. He stood and walked to the viewport, watching the alien landscape of Saturn's largest moon. I was stationed at New Geneva, the capital city. Population 8 million. We had transport ships designed to evacuate maybe 50,000 at a time. The math was simple and terrible. Yilseth's translator caught the bitter edge in his voice. You couldn't save them all. We couldn't save a fraction of them. Marcus turned back to face her. But we tried anyway. Every pilot, every ship, every cargo hauler that could make orbit. We worked for 5 straight days while the Catherian hive fleet tore through our outer defenses. The commander consulted her tablet, scrolling through files that Marcus suspected contained information he'd never seen. The records indicate you made 17 evacuation runs. 18. Marcus corrected her automatically. The last one doesn't appear in most official counts because... He paused, the weight of that final mission still heavy after all these years. Because I wasn't supposed to go back. The planet killer had already been authorized. Command had given the evacuation zone a final deadline, and we'd passed it. Every ship was supposed to clear orbital space within 2 hours. Marcus walked back to his chair but didn't sit down. The energy of remembered urgency made it impossible to remain still. But our sensors detected a massive refugee camp near the southern pole. 40,000 beings who'd been cut off when the Catherians overran the transport hub at Kepler City. Yilseth's eyes widened slightly. You disobeyed direct orders. My squad and I appropriated a heavy transport vessel, the kind used for moving industrial equipment between planets, not designed for atmospheric entry, certainly not rated for evacuating civilians, but it was what we had. The memories came flooding back with surprising clarity. Marcus could still smell the acrid smoke that had filled Kepler 442b's atmosphere as the Catherian bioweapons terraformed vast swaths of the planet's surface. He could still hear the constant thunder of orbital bombardment as humanity's fleet tried desperately to buy more time. The transport ship's atmospheric entry systems failed halfway down. Marcus continued. We came in too fast, too steep. Crashed about 10 kilometers from the refugee camp. Half my squad died in the impact. But you continued the mission. Marcus nodded. My pilot, Sarah Kim, had both legs broken, but she managed to get the ship's communication array working. We contacted the refugees and began organizing pickup zones. The ship's cargo bay could hold maybe 3,000 beings if we packed them tight. He finally sat down, suddenly feeling the weight of his years. That's when we realized the Catherians had found the camp too. Yilseth waited patiently as Marcus gathered himself. These weren't memories he shared often, and certainly not with alien officials he'd just met. But something about the Altarians' calm presence made the words come easier. Catherian ground forces aren't like their ships, Marcus explained. The ships are massive, overwhelming, unstoppable. But their ground troops are small, fast, and absolutely vicious. Think of spiders the size of ground cars with acid for blood and enough intelligence to use basic tactics. The evacuation became a battle. The evacuation became a massacre. Marcus's voice turned hard. We had 4 functioning soldiers, maybe 200 civilian volunteers with hunting rifles, and 40,000 terrified beings to protect. The Catherians had thousands of ground troops pouring through the forest. He stood again, pacing to the viewport. We held them off for 6 hours. 6 hours of constant fighting while we loaded civilians onto every piece of flying junk we could get airborne. Crop dusters, personal shuttles, cargo lifters that hadn't flown in decades. Anything with engines and a cargo space. The scars? Marcus touched his chest again. Catherian bioplasma. Their weapons don't just burn flesh. They rewrite it at the cellular level, turns your own body into a weapon against itself. I took hits that should have killed me, but the combat stims kept me functional long enough to... He trailed off, staring out at Titan's alien sky. Long enough to what, Marcus? Long enough to see the planet killer arrive. The silence that followed was profound. Even the station's ambient noise seemed to fade as the weight of that moment settled between them. I was loading the last transport when Sarah's radio crackled to life. Fleet Command, ordering all remaining ships to clear planetary orbit immediately. The weapon was incoming, targeted for the planet's core. We had 20 minutes to achieve minimum safe distance. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool metal of the viewport. 20 minutes to save 40,000 lives using ships that needed an hour to reach orbit. The math was impossible again. But you tried anyway. We always tried anyway. That's what humans do. Marcus turned back to face Yilseth. We loaded every ship beyond its safety limits. We stripped out life support systems to make room for more beings. We turned cargo haulers into passenger vessels and passenger vessels into refugee arcs. How many did you save? From that camp? 37,843 beings made it to orbit alive. The number came out, with the precision of someone who had counted lives instead of sheep during too many sleepless nights. That's remarkable. Marcus shook his head. 2,000 beings died because we ran out of ships. 2,000 souls I could have saved if I'd been faster, smarter, better at the impossible math of evacuation. And then the planet killer struck. Marcus sat back down, suddenly exhausted by the weight of memory. Sarah and I were on the last transport off the surface. We watched from orbit as humanity's ultimate weapon tore our world apart. 12 billion lives reduced to cosmic debris in the span of 30 seconds. Yilseth was quiet for a long moment, processing the story. The official reports don't mention your unauthorized rescue mission. Command classified it. Bad for morale to know that soldiers were still dying to save civilians even after the planet had been condemned. Marcus met her gaze. But every being we pulled off that world went on to have families, careers, lives. Their children are adults now. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Yilseth said softly, which is why I think you need to hear what the galaxy has learned about the Catherian threat in the years since Kepler 442b. Commander Yilseth activated a holographic display that materialized between them, showing a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic sector. Points of light indicated star systems, with various colors denoting different levels of Catherian activity over the past quarter century. What you're about to see has been classified at the highest levels of the Galactic Council. For 20 years, she began, manipulating the display to focus on the region around what had once been Kepler 442b. We only declassified this information 6 months ago, and even then only to a select few. Marcus studied the hologram with professional interest. His military training had taught him to read tactical displays, but this one showed patterns that made his blood run cold. Those red zones. They're spreading. Indeed. Each red marker represents a system that has been completely consumed by Catherian hive fleets. Yilseth zoomed out. revealing the true scope of the threat. In the 23 years since Kepler 442b, the Cytherians have devoured 47 inhabited systems. That's over 200 billion sentient beings. The numbers hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd spent decades carrying the guilt of the 12 billion lives lost when humanity destroyed its own world. But this was beyond comprehension. But here's what the galaxy didn't understand at the time, Yilseth continued, highlighting a cluster of systems near Kepler 442b's former location. The Cytherian hive that attacked your world wasn't just any hive fleet. It was their primary breeding colony. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. What does that mean? The Cytherians reproduce by consuming biomass from inhabited worlds. Each successful conquest allows them to spawn new hive ships, new ground forces, new breeding colonies. But they can only reproduce at specific sites, worlds that meet very precise environmental and biological criteria. The hologram shifted, showing detailed scans of planets that had been consumed by Cytherian forces. We've studied every world they've attacked. Most are harvested for resources and then abandoned. But breeding colonies, she paused, letting the implication sink in. Breeding colonies are different. They're established on worlds that can support massive population growth. Once established, a single breeding colony can spawn enough forces to threaten entire galactic sectors. Marcus stared at the display, understanding beginning to dawn. Kepler 442b was going to become their primary breeding world. Not just any breeding world. Our xenobiologists have analyzed the planet's former ecosystem extensively. Kepler 442b had the perfect combination of climate, mineral composition, and existing biomass to support what the Cytherians call a genesis hive, a breeding colony capable of producing hundreds of new hive ships. The weight of this revelation settled on Marcus like a physical force. 23 years of guilt, 23 years of believing he'd participated in an act of cosmic genocide. And now, if we hadn't destroyed the planet, he began. The Cytherian forces would have multiplied by a factor of several thousand within 5 years, Yilseth finished. Every simulation we've run suggests that an established Genesis hive at Kepler 442b would have given the Cytherians the resources to overrun this entire arm of the galaxy. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the viewport again. The methane storms on Titan's surface seemed to mirror the turmoil in his mind. You're telling me that the planet killer saved billions of lives? I'm telling you that the planet killer prevented the extinction of galactic civilization as we know it. Yilseth deactivated the hologram and moved to stand beside him. The 12 billion beings who died on Kepler 442b saved trillions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Why wasn't this information released before? Marcus asked, his voice raw with emotion. Why let the survivors carry the guilt of genocide for 20 years? Because the Galactic Council was terrified of the implications, Yilseth admitted. If the galaxy learned that humanity possessed weapons capable of destroying entire planets, and that they were willing to use them on their own worlds, it would have fundamentally altered the balance of power. Marcus laughed bitterly. So instead they let us be seen as monsters. Some species did see humanity as monsters. Others saw you as saviors. But most simply saw you as beings who had made an impossible choice under impossible circumstances. She turned to face him directly. What they didn't understand was that it wasn't just a choice between sacrifice and survival. It was a choice between localized genocide and galactic extinction. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Yilseth's communication device. She glanced at the message and frowned slightly. What is it? Marcus asked. Word of your presence has spread beyond the station. The Galactic Council has requested an emergency session to discuss new information related to Cytherian threat assessment. She looked at him seriously. They want to meet with you. Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in his stomach. Let me guess. They want to study the last living witness to humanity's ultimate weapon. Actually, Yilseth said carefully, they want to ask for your help. My help with what? 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected something troubling. A massive energy signature moving through the Andromeda border zone. The spectral analysis matches known Cytherian hive ship configurations, but the scale... She reactivated the holographic display, showing a real-time scan of deep space. In the center of the image, a red dot moved slowly but inexorably toward populated space. That contact is larger than any Cytherian hive ship we've ever encountered. Our xenobiologists believe it might be what they call an archive, a massive breeding colony ship designed to establish Genesis hives on multiple worlds simultaneously. Marcus studied the display, his military training automatically calculating trajectories and threat assessments. How many worlds could something like that threaten? If our estimates are correct, every inhabited system within a 50 light-year radius. That's over 300 worlds, Marcus. Nearly 1 trillion sentient beings. The magnitude of the threat was staggering. Marcus had thought his war against the Cytherians was over 23 years ago, but apparently, the enemy had just been preparing for round 2. What does the Council expect me to do about it? He asked. I'm one man with old scars and older memories. You're the only living being who has faced a Cytherian Genesis hive and lived to tell about it, Yilseth replied. You understand their tactics, their capabilities, their weaknesses, and more importantly, she paused, choosing her words carefully. More importantly, you represent humanity's willingness to make the impossible choice when the survival of the galaxy is at stake. The Council needs to know if humanity would be willing to deploy planet-killer weapons again, if necessary. Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders once more. After 23 years of running from his past, the galaxy was asking him to embrace it. When do we leave for the Council chambers? He asked quietly. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened in the massive amphitheater aboard Central Station, a neutral space habitat positioned at the gravitational balance point between 5 major star systems. Marcus had never seen anything quite like it. Representatives from over 200 species arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform, each delegation equipped with translation technology and environmental controls suited to their specific needs. As Marcus walked down the central aisle toward the speaking platform, he could feel thousands of eyes tracking his movement. Some belonged to species he recognized from his military days. The crystalline Viridians with their prismatic bodies, the gaseous Netherians contained within their atmospheric suits, the proud avian Kethmori with their brilliant plumage. Others were completely alien to him, beings so different from baseline humanoid forms that his mind struggled to categorize them. Council Speaker Zarathul, an ancient Zentorian whose lifespan measured in millennia rather than decades, called the session to order with a harmonic tone that resonated through every being's consciousness regardless of their auditory biology. We gather an emergency session to address the approaching threat designated Cytherian Archive. Alpha, the speaker announced. Before us stands Marcus Chen, sole surviving witness to the deployment of humanity's planet-killer weapon against a Cytherian Genesis hive. He will provide testimony regarding human capabilities and intentions in the face of existential threat. Marcus stepped onto the speaking platform, feeling remarkably small despite its modest size. The platform's surface adjusted automatically to provide optimal acoustics and visual angles for the assembled delegates. He'd faced Cytherian ground forces, survived planetary bombardment and watched worlds die, but standing before the combined leadership of galactic civilization was somehow more intimidating. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's sophisticated sound system. 23 years ago, I participated in what many of you consider an act of unprecedented destruction. Today I stand before you to explain why that destruction was in fact an act of preservation. A ripple of movement passed through the assembled delegates. Some leaned forward with interest. Others displayed signs of agitation or skepticism. The crystalline Viridians pulsed with shifting colors that Marcus's translation interface identified as expressions of cautious attention. The Cytherian hive fleet that attacked, Kepler 442b, represented more than just another conquest for their species, Marcus continued. According to intelligence that has only recently been declassified, our world was selected as the site for a Genesis hive, a breeding colony capable of producing thousands of new hive ships. He activated a holographic display showing tactical data from the battle for Kepler 442b. The assembled delegates watched in silence as the display showed the planet's defensive grid being systematically overwhelmed by Cytherian forces. My species faced a choice that no sentient beings should ever have to make, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of painful memory. We could allow the Cytherians to establish their Genesis hive and watch them consume the galaxy, one world at a time. or we could destroy our own planet and 12 billion of our own people to prevent that outcome. Delegate Crixnell of the Aquatic Coalition raised the appendage for recognition. The speaker acknowledged the delegate, and Crixnell's translation interface rendered their subsonic communication into standard galactic. Representative Chen, your species possessed weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Why should the galaxy trust that humanity will not use these weapons for conquest rather than defense? Marcus had expected this question. It was, after all, the fundamental concern that had shaped humanity's relationship with the galactic community for over 2 decades. Because, Marcus replied, we used our ultimate weapon to destroy our own world rather than see it fall into enemy hands. Conquest-minded species don't typically begin their campaigns by obliterating their own territory. A sound that might have been laughter rippled through several sections of the amphitheater. The Kethamori delegation ruffled their feathers, and what Marcus's translator indicated was approval. Furthermore, he continued, humanity has had 23 years to expand our planet-killer arsenal and threaten neighboring systems. Instead, we've focused our efforts on defensive technologies and humanitarian missions. The survivors of Kepler 442b have spent the last 2 decades helping to establish refugee settlements and warning systems throughout the Outer Rim territories. Delegate Yethmore of the Silicon Confederation projected a question through harmonic vibrations that translated as skepticism. Yet your species maintains the capability to build these weapons. How do we know you will not deploy them for purposes other than defense against Catherian threats? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. The honest answer was that they didn't know and couldn't know. No species could truly guarantee the actions of future generations under circumstances that couldn't be predicted. You don't know, he said finally, just as we don't know whether the Aquatic Coalition will maintain their peaceful trading policies, or whether the Silicon Confederation will continue honoring mineral rights agreements. What we do know is that when faced with an enemy that threatened all galactic civilization, humanity chose to sacrifice itself rather than allow that threat to spread. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The approaching archive represents the same level of threat that we faced at Kepler 442b, magnified by several orders of magnitude. If our estimates are correct, this single vessel could establish Genesis hives on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Within a decade, the Catherian forces would be unstoppable. The speaker's harmonic tone requested silence as excited chatter broke out among various delegations. When order was restored, they addressed Marcus directly. Representative Chen, what does humanity propose in response to this threat? This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. The weight of speaking for his entire species pressed down on him, like the gravity of a gas giant. Humanity proposes a coordinated defense utilizing every available resource, he said carefully. Combined fleet actions, evacuation protocols for threatened systems, and if necessary, he took a deep breath. If necessary, the deployment of planet-killer weapons to prevent the establishment of Genesis hives. The amphitheater erupted in discussion. Some delegates displayed obvious alarm at the mention of planet-killer weapons, while others seemed relieved that someone was willing to address the threat directly. Delegate Morgeth of the Thermal Worlds stood to address the assembly. Their massive, rock-like form radiated heat that distorted the air around them. The Thermal Worlds have maintained detailed records of Catherian expansion patterns. Our analysis confirms Representative Chen's assessment of the threat level. However, we question whether planet-killer weapons represent the only viable response. What alternatives would you propose? Marcus asked. Evacuation of threatened systems followed by stellar containment protocols. If we cannot stop the archive, perhaps we can isolate it within a designated sector and prevent its spread. Marcus shook his head. Respectfully, Delegate Morgeth, containment only works if the enemy cooperates with your boundaries. Catherian hive ships are capable of faster-than-light travel and can establish new colonies faster than we can evacuate threatened populations. Isolation strategies assume a level of control over enemy movement that we simply don't possess. The debate continued for hours, with delegates proposing various strategies ranging from diplomatic contact attempts to massive military offensives. Each proposal was analyzed, discussed, and ultimately found insufficient for the scale of the threat they faced. Finally, the ancient speaker called for order once more. The testimony has been illuminating, But we must now address the central question. Will the Galactic Council authorize the use of planet-killer weapons to prevent Catherian Genesis hive establishment? The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on the assembled delegates as they contemplated a decision that would define the galaxy's future. The vote will be conducted tomorrow, the speaker announced. All delegates will have 12 standard hours to consult with their governments and prepare their positions. This session is adjourned. As the amphitheater began to empty, Marcus remained on the speaking platform, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. The galaxy was about to vote on whether to authorize weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. Commander Yilseth approached the platform. "How do you think they'll vote?" she asked. Marcus looked out at the departing delegates, representatives of hundreds of worlds and trillions of beings. "I think they'll do what they have to do," he said quietly. "The question is whether that will be enough." Marcus spent the night in quarters provided by the Galactic Council, but sleep eluded him. Through the viewport he could see the lights of hundreds of ships as delegates returned to their vessels to consult with their home governments. The weight of representing humanity's darkest capability pressed on him like the gravity of a neutron star. At 400 station time, his door chimed softly. Marcus opened it to find Commander Yilseth holding 2 cups of what appeared to be coffee. "Altarian blend," she explained, offering him one of the cups. "Our biochemistry is similar enough to humans that we share a fondness for caffeine-based stimulants." Marcus accepted the cup gratefully. The liquid was bitter but warming, with an underlying sweetness that made it surprisingly pleasant. "Any word from the delegations?" "Unofficial channels suggest the vote will be close," Yilseth said, settling into a chair. The older established civilizations tend to favor authorization. They've seen what unchecked expansion can do to galactic stability. The younger species are more hesitant about legitimizing planet-killer weapons. "I can't blame them for being hesitant," Marcus said. 24 hours ago, most of them probably didn't even know such weapons existed. "The technology isn't what frightens them," Yilseth observed. "It's the willingness to use it. Most species view their homeworld as sacred, inviolable. The idea of deliberately destroying an inhabited planet challenges fundamental assumptions about the value of life and the limits of acceptable sacrifice." Marcus sipped his coffee and considered this. "What do your people think?" "Altarians are long-lived enough to remember the last great galactic crisis," Yilseth replied. 1,600 years ago, a species called the Devourers emerged from dark space and began systematically consuming everything in their path. The galactic community of that era tried negotiation, containment, even appeasement. Nothing worked. What finally stopped them? They consumed themselves into extinction, ran out of resources to sustain their expansion, and collapsed into civil war. Yilseth's expression grew somber, but not before they had destroyed over 4,000 inhabited worlds. "We learned that some threats cannot be reasoned with or contained. They can only be stopped." At 800, they returned to the amphitheater for the vote. The atmosphere was noticeably more tense than the previous day, with delegates clustered in tight groups engaged in urgent, whispered conversations. Marcus took his position on the speaking platform, though no testimony was scheduled for this session. Speaker Zarathul called the assembly to order with their characteristic harmonic tone. "The question before the council is Resolution 2847. Authorization for the deployment of planet-killer weapons against Catherian Genesis hive sites. Voting will be conducted by delegation, with each species casting a single vote regardless of population or territorial holdings. The voting process was conducted electronically, with each delegation's decision transmitted directly to the central tabulation system." Marcus watched the display as votes accumulated. Green indicators for authorization, red for opposition, yellow for abstention. The early votes favored authorization, with the older, more established civilizations supporting the resolution as expected. The thermal worlds voted yes, as did the Crystalline Confederation and the Aquatic Coalition. But as newer species began casting their votes, the numbers grew closer. The Silicon Confederation voted no, along with the Ethereal Collective and the Biosynthetic Union. Several smaller delegations abstained, apparently unable to reach consensus within their governments. Marcus found himself holding his breath as the final votes were tabulated. The display showed 127 votes for authorization, 119 against with 23 abstentions. The resolution had passed but barely. Resolution 2847 is adopted by the narrowest margin in Council history, Speaker Zarathul announced. The Galactic Council hereby authorizes the limited deployment of planet-killer weapons for the specific purpose of preventing Catherian Genesis Hive establishment. The amphitheater erupted in discussion, with some delegations celebrating while others displayed obvious distress. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and dread. The galaxy had authorized the use of humanity's ultimate weapon, but the narrow margin of victory suggested that any deployment would be heavily scrutinized and politically costly. The authorization comes with strict conditions, the Speaker continued once order was restored. Planet-killer weapons may only be deployed against worlds that have been confirmed as Catherian Genesis Hive sites. Each deployment must be approved by a 2/3 majority of the Emergency Defense Committee. And most importantly, evacuation protocols must be exhausted before any weapon is fired. Delegate Crixnell of the Aquatic Coalition requested recognition. Speaker, what guarantee do we have that these weapons will not be used for purposes other than Catherian defense? The resolution establishes a joint oversight committee with representatives from 12 major species, the Speaker replied. Additionally, all planet-killer weapons will be equipped with quantum-encrypted authorization, codes that require simultaneous approval from multiple council members. Marcus understood the political necessity of these safeguards, but he also recognized their potential to cause dangerous delays in crisis situations. Military actions required split-second decisions, not committee votes and diplomatic negotiations. After the session adjourned, Marcus was immediately escorted to a secure briefing room where Admiral Sarah Okafor, the current commander of humanity's Deep Space Fleet, waited with a holographic display showing the approaching Archive's projected course. Marcus, Admiral Okafor said, extending her hand. I've read your file. It's an honor to meet a Kepler veteran. The honor is mine, Admiral. Marcus studied the tactical display. What's our current assessment of the threat? Worse than we initially thought, Admiral Okafor admitted. Long-range scans suggest the Archive is actually a cluster of interconnected vessels. Our xenobiologists believe it's not just carrying the components for multiple Genesis hives, but also the breeding stock to populate them immediately upon arrival. She manipulated the display to show detailed scans of the approaching vessels. Each component is roughly the size of a moon, with organic armor plating that's proven resistant to conventional weapons. Our preliminary attack simulations suggest that even a concentrated fleet assault would only slow it down, not stop it. What about planet-killer weapons? Marcus asked. That's where it gets complicated. Admiral Okafor highlighted several components of the Archive cluster. The individual vessels are too small to be effectively targeted by planet-killer weapons, which are designed for planetary-scale targets. But if they establish Genesis hives on multiple worlds simultaneously, we'd need to destroy multiple planets to stop them, Marcus finished. The political cost would be enormous. Exactly. Which is why we need a different approach. Admiral Okafor activated a new section of the display. Our tactical teams have developed what we're calling the Kepler Protocol, a strategy specifically designed for this type of threat. Marcus leaned forward, studying the tactical overlay. Explain. Instead of waiting for the Archive to establish Genesis hives, we intercept it in deep space using a coordinated fleet action. We can't destroy it outright, but we can force it to alter course toward a designated target system. What kind of target system? Admiral Okafor smiled grimly. A system with no inhabited worlds, but with planetary masses suitable for Genesis hive establishment. We let them land, begin their breeding process, and then we destroy the entire system with a stellar-class planet killer, Marcus realized. Take out the star itself and everything in the system with it. Precisely. No inhabited worlds destroyed. No civilian casualties, but complete elimination of the Catherian threat. The political implications are much more manageable. Marcus studied the plan, noting its elegant simplicity. What about evacuation protocols? The Council's authorization requires them. That's the beauty of it. There's nothing to evacuate. The target system is designated as uninhabited space. Admiral Okafor highlighted a star system on the edge of the galactic rim. System designation Ross 847. 3 rocky planets, 2 gas giants, no life-bearing worlds. Perfect for our purposes. How do we guarantee the Archive will follow our projected course? That's where you come in, Admiral Okafor said. We need someone with direct experience fighting Catherians to help design the tactical approach. Someone who understands their behavior patterns and decision-making processes. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. You want me to help plan the destruction of another world? I want you to help plan the salvation of the galaxy, Admiral Okafor corrected. The Kepler Protocol isn't about destruction, Marcus. It's about precision. Instead of waiting for the enemy to force us into impossible choices, we create a situation where the choice becomes possible. Marcus walked to the viewport, looking out at the vast star field beyond Central Station. Somewhere in that darkness, the Archive was approaching, carrying with it the potential for galactic catastrophe. But for the first time in 23 years, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Kepler 442b. Hope. When do we begin? He asked immediately. We have 6 weeks before the Archive reaches the Outer Rim territories. The fleet is already Staging Point Zulu existed in the void between star systems, a massive mobile command station surrounded by the largest fleet Marcus had ever seen. Ships from dozens of species formed defensive formations that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Human dreadnoughts floated alongside Kethamori battle carriers, while Altarian science vessels conducted deep space reconnaissance beside thermal world mining ships that had been hastily converted to military support roles. Marcus stood in the Fleet Command Center, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching Archive's position, updated in real time. The enemy formation had changed since the initial detection. The individual components were spreading out, creating a loose cloud of massive vessels that would be even harder to intercept as a unified target. They're adapting, Admiral Okafor observed, studying the same displays. Catherian tactical evolution is faster than we anticipated. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, looked up from her analysis station. It's not just tactical adaptation. The Archive is exhibiting behavioral patterns we've never seen before. They're conducting what appears to be deep space resource harvesting. Marcus frowned. What kind of resources? Dark matter, quantum fluctuations, even background radiation. They're converting empty space into biological mass somehow. Dr. Vasquez highlighted sections of the tactical display. Each day they spend in transit, the Archive grows larger. How much larger? Admiral Okafor asked. Current growth rate suggests they'll be 15% larger by the time they reach the Ross 847 system. If they continue harvesting resources during approach, they could be 25% larger. Marcus studied the implications. Larger means more breeding stock, more potential genesis hives. It also means our original target might not be sufficient, Admiral Okafor said grimly. A stellar-class planet killer is designed to destroy normal star systems. If the Archive has grown beyond our calculations, we might need multiple weapons, Marcus finished, which means multiple votes from the Council, multiple opportunities for political interference. Commander Yilseth, who had joined the fleet as the Council's official observer, approached their group. There may be another option. Our long-range scouts have detected something interesting about the Ross 847 system. She activated a detailed scan of their target system, highlighting unusual energy readings from the central star. Ross 847 is what astrophysicists call a metastable star. It's been burning helium for longer than should be physically possible. Our stellar engineers believe it's on the verge of natural collapse. How close to collapse? Dr. Vasquez asked. Anywhere from 6 months to 6,000 years. But the quantum structure is so unstable that even a minor gravitational disturbance could trigger immediate stellar collapse. Marcus began to understand. We don't need a planet-killer weapon to destroy the system. We just need to destabilize an already unstable star. Precisely, Commander Yilseth confirmed. A concentrated bombardment of the star's quantum shell could trigger a controlled supernova. The energy release would be sufficient to sterilize the entire system, regardless of how much the Archive has grown. Admiral Okafor was already running calculations on her tactical display. How much bombardment would be required? According to our stellar engineers, approximately 48 hours of sustained plasma bombardment, focused on specific quantum resonance points. Commander Yilseth highlighted target zones on the star's surface. We would need to maintain precise firing patterns to ensure controlled collapse rather than random explosion. That's a significant tactical challenge, Marcus observed. 48 hours is long enough for the Catherians to detect our presence and mount a counterattack. Which brings us to the next phase of the Kepler Protocol, Admiral Okafor said, activating a new tactical display. We're not going to hide our presence. We're going to advertise it. The display showed the planned fleet deployment around Ross 847. Instead of a defensive formation, the ships were arranged in what appeared to be an aggressive assault pattern. We want the Archive to think we're planning a direct attack, Admiral Okafor explained. Their tactical response will be to deploy defensive formations around the most valuable components of their fleet, the breeding stock and Genesis hive establishment equipment. Marcus studied the formation. They'll cluster their most important assets in the center of their formation, protected by the expendable combat units. Exactly. And clustered assets are more vulnerable to stellar destruction than spread-out formations. Admiral Okafor highlighted the projected Catherian response patterns. Our behavioral analysis suggests they'll establish a defensive perimeter, approximately 2 astronomical units from the primary star. Well within the supernova's destructive radius, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Even their most heavily armored vessels won't survive stellar collapse at that distance. Commander Yilseth raised a concern. What about our own fleet? 48 hours of bombardment operations puts our ships dangerously close to the blast zone. That's where the final component of the Kepler Protocol comes into play, Admiral Okafor said. We're not using conventional ships for the bombardment. We're using automated platforms, unmanned vessels equipped with plasma bombardment systems and quantum-encrypted navigation computers. She showed them detailed schematics of the bombardment platforms. Each was roughly the size of a fighter craft, but packed with enough firepower to rival a heavy cruiser. More importantly, they were designed to operate without crew, eliminating the risk to sentient life during the operation. The platforms will be deployed from maximum safe distance, Admiral Okafor continued. They'll approach the target star under autonomous control, conduct the bombardment sequence, and attempt to escape the blast zone. Whether they succeed or not, the mission will be completed. Marcus felt a familiar mix of admiration and unease at the plan's elegant ruthlessness. How many platforms? 87, deployed from 17 different ships to ensure redundancy. Even if the Catherians detect and destroy half of them, we'll still have sufficient firepower to trigger stellar collapse. And if they detect the plan and withdraw from the system? Then we've bought the galaxy several more weeks to prepare alternative defenses, Admiral Okafor replied. But our behavioral analysis suggests they won't withdraw. Catherian archives are biologically programmed to establish Genesis hives. Once they've identified suitable target systems, retreat goes against their fundamental nature. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis station. Admiral, we're receiving new data from the long-range scouts. The archive has altered course again. The tactical display updated to show the enemy formation's new trajectory. Instead of heading directly for the Outer Rim territories, they were now angling toward Ross 847. They've detected our fleet movements, Marcus realized. They know we're trying to intercept them. Good, Admiral Okafor said with satisfaction. Let them think they're outsmarting us by choosing their own battlefield. They're heading exactly where we want them to go. Commander Yilseth frowned at the display. Admiral, there's something else. The Archive's approach vector puts them at Ross 847 12 hours ahead of our original schedule. 12 hours less preparation time, Marcus observed. Can the bombardment platforms be ready? They'll have to be, Admiral Okafor replied. Signal all fleet elements whilst we're accelerating the timeline. Deployment of bombardment platforms begins in 6 hours. As the command center erupted in coordinated activity, Marcus found himself thinking about the beings aboard the approaching archive. They were following their biological imperatives, seeking to reproduce and expand just as countless species had done throughout galactic history. But their method of expansion threatened the existence of every other form of life in the galaxy. Admiral, he said quietly, are we sure this is the right choice? Admiral Okafor looked at him with understanding. Marcus, 23 years ago you made an impossible choice to save the galaxy. Today we're making a difficult choice to save the galaxy. The difference is that this time we're choosing the battlefield instead of having it chosen for us. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the massive fleet assembled around them. Every ship here represents a species that voted to trust humanity with planet-killer technology. They're counting on us to use that technology wisely and effectively. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of that trust. Then let's make sure we're worthy of it. The Kepler Protocol was about to begin, and with it humanity's chance to prove that ultimate weapons could be tools of protection rather than destruction. The Ross 847 system had become a battlefield unlike any in galactic history. The Catherian archive had arrived exactly as predicted, its massive components spreading into a defensive formation around the system's 3 inner planets. From the Fleet Command Center, Marcus watched as enemy vessels that dwarfed entire cities took positions that would have been impregnable against any conventional attack. Bombardment platforms are in position, reported Commander Singh, the fleet's tactical coordinator, all 87 units showing green status and awaiting final authorization codes. Admiral Okafor stood before the primary tactical display, her face illuminated by the ghostly light of holographic projections showing the positions of over 300 ships spread across the system. Representatives from 12 different species stood at various monitoring stations, each ready to provide the authorization codes required by the Galactic Council's resolution. Dr. Vasquez, final assessment of stellar stability? Admiral Okafor requested. Ross 847 remains in critical quantum instability, the xenobiologist reported. Bombardment of the designated resonance points should trigger stellar collapse within 18 to 24 hours of initiation. However, Admiral Okafor prompted, the Catherian vessels are emitting some kind of quantum field that's actually stabilizing the star's quantum shell. They may be trying to prevent exactly what we're attempting. Marcus studied the enemy formation on the tactical display. They're not just defending against our fleet. They're defending against our real strategy, which means they understand stellar engineering better than we anticipated, Commander Yilseth observed from her position as Council observer. If they can maintain quantum stabilization, our bombardment platforms won't be able to trigger collapse. Admiral Okafor was quiet for a moment, weighing their options. What would happen if we disrupted their quantum field generation? Dr. Vasquez ran quick calculations on her analysis station. If we could interrupt their stabilization field for even 30 seconds, the star's natural instability would cascade into immediate collapse. But disrupting the field would require direct assault on the Catherian fleet, Marcus finished, which means putting our ships within their defensive perimeter. The casualties would be enormous, Commander Singh added. Our fleet is formidable, but those archive components are the most heavily armed vessels we've ever encountered. Admiral Okafor activated a secure communication channel. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Okafor. Prepare for tactical revision Alpha 7. We're going to give the Catherians something they've never experienced before. A simultaneous attack they can't possibly defend against. She turned to address the command center. The original Kepler protocol assumed we could trigger stellar collapse through stealth bombardment. Since stealth is no longer an option, we're adapting to a direct assault strategy. A new tactical display materialized, showing a complex attack pattern that would put every ship in the fleet at maximum risk. Phase 1. Bombardment platforms begin firing sequence to draw Catherian attention and force them to commit defensive resources. Phase 2. Fleet elements Alpha through Delta conduct diversionary attacks on the outer defensive perimeter. Phase 3. Fleet elements Echo through Hotel penetrate the inner system and assault the quantum stabilization generators. Marcus studied the plan with growing concern. Admiral, this puts our ships directly between the Catherian fleet and an unstable star that's about to go supernova. Even if we succeed in disrupting their quantum field, we'll have minutes to escape the blast zone, which is why Phase 4 involves immediate fleet-wide jump to hyperspace the moment stellar collapse begins. Admiral Okafor replied. Every ship has pre-calculated escape vectors. The moment Dr. Vasquez confirms cascade initiation, we abandon the system. Commander Yilseth stepped forward. Admiral, I must remind you that the Council's authorization specifically requires evacuation protocols. Are you certain no civilian populations will be affected by stellar collapse? Ross 847 is uninhabited space, Commander. The only casualties will be military forces engaged in active combat operations. Admiral Okafor's voice carried the weight of command decision. Both ours and theirs. The authorization codes were transmitted simultaneously from 12 different stations, each representative entering their species' unique cipher sequence. The tactical display showed all systems activating as the Kepler protocol entered its final phase. Bombardment platforms commencing firing sequence, Commander Singh reported. Enemy vessels are responding with defensive countermeasures. Through the command center's viewports, Marcus could see the distant flashes of plasma bombardment as 87 automated platforms opened fire on Ross 847's unstable quantum shell. The star's surface erupted in massive solar flares as concentrated energy struck the precisely calculated resonance points. Catherian fleet is deploying countermeasures, Dr. Vasquez announced. They're using some kind of quantum resonance dampening field to absorb the bombardment energy. Admiral Okafor activated fleet communications. All units execute Phase 2. Diversionary attack begins now. The tactical display erupted in movement as hundreds of ships accelerated toward the Catherian defensive perimeter. Marcus watched in fascination as the enemy responded exactly as predicted, repositioning their most powerful vessels to intercept the incoming threat. Phase 3 units, you are clear for inter-system penetration, Admiral Okafor commanded. Target the quantum stabilization generators and maintain firing solutions until stellar cascade begins. Marcus felt the familiar tension of combat as friendly ships dove toward the heart of the enemy formation. The viewports showed weapon fire on a scale that defied comprehension. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains, striking armor plating that could withstand planetary bombardment. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez called out urgently. We're reading massive quantum fluctuations from the star's core. The bombardment platforms have created resonance cascade points, but the Catherian stabilization field is preventing final collapse. Distance to target generators? Admiral Okafor demanded. Phase 3 units are engaging now, Commander Singh reported. Heavy resistance, but they're maintaining attack vectors. The tactical display showed their ships taking devastating losses as they pressed through the Catherian inner defensive line. Marcus watched ships that represented years of construction and thousands of crew members disappear from the display as enemy fire found its mark. But they were also inflicting damage. The massive Catherian vessels, designed for overwhelming force rather than maneuverability, struggled to defend against the coordinated assault from multiple vectors. Direct hit on Stabilization Generator 7, Dr. Vasquez announced. Quantum field strength dropping to 80%. Generator 12 is down, Commander Singh added. Field strength at 60%. Admiral Okafor leaned forward, watching the tactical display with intense concentration. How much disruption do we need? 50% or lower should trigger immediate cascade, Dr. Vasquez replied. But we're losing ships faster than we're destroying generators. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Admiral, request permission to take direct command of Phase 3 operations. Admiral Okafor looked at him sharply. Marcus, you're not a fleet officer. You're a ground assault specialist. I'm someone who understands Catherian tactical thinking, Marcus replied. And I've seen what happens when we hesitate in the face of impossible choices. After a moment's consideration, Admiral Okafor nodded. Granted. Commander Singh, transfer tactical control of Phase 3 units to Marcus Chen. Marcus stepped up to the command station, feeling the weight of hundreds of lives in his hands. The tactical display showed 23 ships still engaged with the inner defensive perimeter, facing overwhelming odds against an enemy that seemed invincible. All Phase 3 units, this is Marcus Chen, he transmitted. I want simultaneous bombardment of generators 4, 9, and 15. Ignore defensive fire and maintain attack runs until target destruction is confirmed. Sir, that will put us directly in the path of their primary weapons, came the reply from Captain Torres of the cruiser Valiant. Captain, 23 years ago I watched my own planet die to stop these creatures. Today we're going to finish what we started. Marcus's voice carried across the fleet communications. All units execute attack run now. The remaining ships dove toward their targets in perfect coordination, absorbing devastating fire, but maintaining their attack vectors. Marcus watched the tactical display as 3 more ships disappeared, then 4, then 5. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Generator 4 destroyed, Dr. Vasquez announced. Generator 9 is down. Generator 15 shows critical damage. Quantum field strength at 47% and dropping. The viewport suddenly blazed with brilliant light as Ross 847's quantum shell finally collapsed. The star's core began the cascade process that would lead to supernova within minutes. All units immediate hyperspace jump. Admiral Okafor commanded, execute emergency evacuation procedures now. Marcus watched as ships across the system activated their faster-than-light drives. disappearing in flashes of distorted space-time. The Catherian vessels,